Man, this game is just brutal. Brutal Sports Football was an extremely violent take on the football and rugby concept. It's an interesting artifact from the Attitude Era of sports games, and it certainly is different. However, the more I play this game, the more frustrated I feel with it. I mean, the blood and brutality is cool, I guess, but there's just something about the gameplay that feels off to me. So I guess you can think of this game as something like a cross between Doom and a sports game, except for one small problem. This game just isn't fun. And I mean, when I say it's not fun, I mean that this game totally sucks. Like, I got bored with this game about 5 minutes into playing it. But the thing is that the concept behind this game is really not all that bad. It's just that the execution is off. Let me explain. As you know, football is kind of a complex sport, which is why really old football games like 10-Yard Fight feel a little bit off, especially these days. As time went on and programming methods improved, companies started coming out with games that were, fun to play. And by the early 1990s, games like Tecmo Super Bowl demonstrated that there really was a big market out there for American football games. So I bring up Tecmo Super Bowl here because it was really the pinnacle of NES football gaming success. However, the game that really got all the companies excited about making football games wasn't Tecmo Super Bowl. No, it was the Madden series. Despite being really slow and pretty clunky, the first John Madden football game on the Sega Genesis was actually really impressive, so much so that it defined the genre. Of course, it helped that Madden's first real competitor, Joe Montana Football, was literally made by the same company, which is why it feels so much like Madden. If you compare those games with something like NES Play Action Football, you'll see right away why the trend went towards making Madden-style games. Now, the games that we've talked about here so far generally came out in the early 1990s. At that time, there was not a whole ton of football games out there. However, once you get up to around 1993, there's this sudden explosion of football games, right? In fact, that era between 1993 and like 1995 or so, that was probably the all-time height of football video games. And the interesting thing is that almost all of these games were trying to do the exact same thing. So, for example, Capcom came out with its own football game on the Super NES in late 1992 and early 1993. Personally, I really like this game. It's fast, it has good play control, even though it's clearly a Madden clone. Konami's NFL Football came out a few months later, and it was a little bit less fun to play. I mean, maybe you can have fun with it if you can get used to the constant screen rotation and the impossibly slow frame rate, but I just can't stand this game. And there were a bunch of games that I haven't played quite yet. For example, Monday Night Football for the Super Nintendo. There was the original Quarterback Club for the Game Boy. And there was also this Sega CD game that probably isn't worth the 99 cents on the sticker, but we'll get to that one in another video. Now, this wasn't just a trend that was limited to video game consoles, right? The thing is that video game companies everywhere, including on the PC, were trying to jump onto the football bandwagon. Every single one of these games, like I said before, was trying to do the exact same thing that Madden had already done. That's most obvious if you're looking at the Football Pro series on the PC. This game looks and feels a lot like the Madden games. Really, the only difference is that the Madden series has slightly crispier looking graphics and of course better play control. Incomplete. It's pretty obvious that Football Pro was modeled on the Madden games and not on something like the old Tom Landry games.
Second down.
And there are more games. There's dozens of games, actually. I haven't had the time yet to play them all, but I'll play them one by one and I'll talk about each of them in turn here on the channel. Now, there was one really big problem here, right? That problem is that every single company was basically trying to do the exact same thing. And so if you've got like 50 different games and they're all basically the same, like how does the gamer know which game to pay attention to? And so it was really hard for these companies to get any attention at all. If you take a look at old video game magazines like this December 1993 issue of GamePro, you'll see the problem right away. EA Sports, which was the market leader, turned the release day of the latest Madden game into a big event that November. That was something they called Madden Football Friday. EA's competitors were desperate and tried using complex and expensive multi-page color ads to compete. It's not clear how effective these ads really were, but these companies were desperate to get at least some sort of attention from the gaming public. And since the games were all so similar, the only real way to differentiate yourself was to come up with some kind of creative or impressive slogan. Well, either that or make a game that, is legitimately different. And the thing is that Brutal Sports Football actually was different. Now, normally being different in an incredibly competitive market is a breath of fresh air, right? It's a really good thing. The problem, though, is that this particular game is just not any good. I mean, obviously, this isn't a traditional American football or rugby game, right? There are minimal rules at best, though there certainly is a lot of violence. But honestly, the first problem here is that the field just is not big enough for this to be interesting. And if the other team winds up losing a bunch of players in the game, you'll find that it's way too easy to score. So I'll admit here, like, I had the game on the easiest setting, right, which is probably why it felt so easy, right? That makes sense. But seriously, it would really be a lot nicer if the field were, like, at least a little bit larger. I mean, with the field being so small, it feels like you're scoring, like, every couple of seconds. And the biggest problem is that scoring slows down the clock, which makes it feel like the game just takes forever to finish. So the thing is that Brutal Sports Football is basically a clone of the old Speedball Amiga games. While the Speedball games were vertically oriented, it's still basically the same thing as Brutal Sports Football. This basic concept was also copied in another Amiga game called Future Basketball. If you watch this game for only a few seconds, you'll see the similarities right away. Meanwhile, Future Basketball was ported over to the Super NES as Bill Lambier's Combat Basketball, one of the worst basketball games of all time. Brutal Sports Football is essentially the same game, except with swords and a little bit more violence. Now, I'm not sure if there was like some sort of memory limitation on the Amiga that prevented these games from using a larger playing field, or exactly what's going on. The thing, though, is that there was this period of time in the early 1990s where making these like sports games on a square field was really all the rage. Now, the thing you have to realize is that almost all of these games were created by British or European companies. So, like, maybe it was a trend over, in Europe or something like that. I don't know. I wasn't in Europe at the time. Anyway, all of these games share a same significant flaw, right? Like, doesn't matter which one of these Amiga games you play, they're all just about the same. The frame rate on these games is just simply atrocious. I mean, I don't know if this was just an Amiga thing or what, but so many of these Amiga games have frame rates that make them just unplayable. The frame rate on the Amiga version of Brutal Sports Football reminds me a lot of the horrible frame rate for the arcade version of Magic Johnson's Fast Break, which ran on Amiga hardware. And it's not just an Amiga hardware thing either. The DOS port has the same frame rate problems. In fact, I think that this is actually worse than the Amiga version. The Atari Jaguar port of the game is a little bit better, but it's still really, really jerky. And personally, for me, that's where this game really falls apart. I mean, who in their right mind would want to play a herky-jerky football game, right? Where you feel like you're kind of going like that, right? Why couldn't they, tone down the graphical detail a little bit and make the game actually run smoothly? And speaking of which, what's up with the Atari Jaguar? Wasn't this a 64-bit system? Why do Amiga games struggle on the Atari Jaguar hardware? Now, despite my complaints, there are some parts of this game that are kind of cool. If you're playing the season mode, for example, you can heal your players up in between games. It's kind of hard to figure out how this works since there's no text, but what happens is you pay points you earn from your game to heal your guys up and get ready for the next game. I couldn't get this to work at all in the DOS version, but I'm guessing that I was probably doing something wrong. And hey, at least this game had a season mode, right? I mean, that's better than the Madden games. Up until Madden 94, all you had was like a playoff mode, and you had to play all of that in one setting. If you wanted to actually play a season, you had to play every single game one by one and then write them down like on a piece of paper or something so you can keep track of the stats. I mean, it's totally insane. Anyway, the thing that disappoints me the most about Brutal Sports Football is that it really could have been so much better. In fact, there was a game years earlier that was based on a similar concept that was a lot better. That would be Pigskin 621 AD, of course, one of the best arcade-style football games that I've ever played. This game also had basically no rules, though at least they toned the violence down a bit. The level is a lot longer, you get more players per side, and the individual players at least have their own personalities and faces. Meanwhile, in Brutal Sports Football, all of your players look the same, and the graphics are so blurry that you probably couldn't tell who was who if they looked different anyway. The crazy thing here is that Pigskin 621 AD came out in 1990. That's 3 years before Brutal Sports Football was released. Yeah, that's right. They had 3 whole years to come up with something that would look like halfway decent, and all we got was this blurry and junky mess. And the part that really drives me nuts about this is that this is the early 1990s, right? I mean, go play like any PC game from 1990 and then a game from 1993. Heck, go play like Commander Keen 1 on the PC and then Commander Keen 4, right? It's like night and day. I mean, the crazy thing is that even the Genesis version of Pigskin 621 AD, even that game is better than the Atari Jaguar version of Brutal Sports Football. Actually, they changed the name to Jerry Glanville's Pigskin Foot Brawl on the Sega Genesis for some reason. Anyway, since the Sega Genesis uses the same processor that the arcade game used, the gameplay and the graphics are almost identical. The Genesis version is a little bit more fun because you can turn it on turbo mode and you can watch the players go by really quickly. The sound in the Genesis port is excellent, and the game really is a lot of fun to play. I could seriously play this game over and over again. And I'm never going to get over the fact that a Sega Genesis game had a better frame rate, better sound, and better overall graphics than a freaking Atari Jaguar game. So I don't know, I'm guessing that those of you who were unfortunate enough to own an Atari Jaguar back in those days probably knew this already. I mean, I don't know. I didn't have one, my friends didn't have one, right? We were all poor. It just seems like the systems that were really hyped up in 1993 and 1994, the ones everyone says were the thing of the future, all these systems were just absolute garbage. But it's not just the graphics that made Pigskin 621 AD the better game. Actually, the gameplay elements are really what makes that game stand out. I mean, Pigskin 621 AD feels like mass chaos no matter what. While you technically can change strategies as the game goes on, I don't see the point in doing so since it's not like you're calling plays or anything like that. And honestly, the thing that makes this game so much fun is that literally anything can happen at any point in time. Brutal Sports Football might have the violence part down, I guess, but the gameplay itself is lame and really boring. It's kind of hard to see, but I think that there are obstacles and stuff like that on the field, though the screen really is not big enough for you to see what's actually going on. In fact, it feels like the focus of this game was on the violence alone, almost like the programmers really just wanted a game that was going to get attention from gaming magazines. And this is really an important lesson to learn, and I would argue that this applies today in the modern world of Madden games and all the clones and like NCAA football and all that jazz. Yeah, I mean, it's great that you offer up a simulation, it's great that you have these crazy graphics and like, you know, the stadium music, and like I've seen with like the college football game, NCAA football, where like the screen shakes or whatever, the crowd's cheering, you know, whatever, that's great, have fun, have good graphics. But the thing that's most important is making a game that's actually playable. The game itself, the part that players play, that has to come first. That comes before everything else. I will admit that I don't have any clips of the newest Madden games, I don't have a PS5, but it's really not that different from something like Madden 2005, which is what you see here. Now, obviously, these games are designed to be football simulators to the point where the feeling of a live football game is more important than like the good controls or game design or anything like that. Now, this is impressive, don't get me wrong, but it just doesn't feel as wild, chaotic, and as fun as Pigskin 621 AD. Personally, I would rather run around punching people and trying desperately to move to the right than worry about realism. So you can see this in other sports games as well. In fact, I would argue that every single sport has something like this, where you have games that are simulations that are kind of crappy, and then you have other games that are a little bit more arcade-based and that are designed to be fun that people actually like to play. But the best example of this anywhere is the NBA Jam series. So I mean, before NBA Jam came out, most basketball games were realistic, like these old EA Sports console games. Now this game's not unplayable, but it is pretty frustrating, especially since the focus is clearly on the animations and not on like the play control. In contrast, NBA Jam was all about arcade fun, exaggerated action, and crazy stuff. There's a reason why a lot of us still play NBA Jam to this day and not those old EA Sports basketball games. And for me at least, that's the same reason I would rather play Pigskin 621 than Brutal Sports Football, or even than a lot of the Madden games. It's because this game is a lot more fun. Let's go! Anyway, all in all, I guess the moral of this story is that the best games are actually focused on being good games first, right? The thing about Pigskin 621 AD is that it was designed first and foremost to be an addictive arcade game, right? The sort of game where kids want to keep putting the quarter in because it's like crazy stuff happens and like the game's always close and so on and so forth, right? The problem that we've always had is that a lot of these games are set up to be like simulations first, with the actual game itself being secondary. It's like it's an afterthought. In the case of Brutal Sports Football, it's like the violence came first. We wanted to show guys like stabbing each other or whatever, and oh yeah, by the way, there is a game here that you actually play, but look at those graphics, right? The thing is, if you want to make a game that's going to last, that people will play in 20 years, 30 years, or however long it's been, you've got to focus on creating something that the players won't forget. You have to give them a special experience. Now, as far as Brutal Sports Football is concerned, this is the sort of game that all of us will forget right away. It just isn't that good.